What's up, everyone? It's Giant Duke 3 here. So this is going to be a logic proposal. It's not code-based, so if you don't know programming, that is completely fine. You can still follow along, hopefully. Um, and let's just go over generally what we're going to go over. So the first part is just going to be kind of like big ideas and special things. By the time it gets to items all the way through conditions, it will be more code-y, but not code. It'll make sense when we get there. And then for logic and goals, those are more abstract concepts, not fleshed out at all. That'll get fleshed out as we work on it and discuss it. So no worries there. So I do want to give a special thanks to the DK64 Rando team, specifically, and I'm not saying only these two, but specifically these two. L Rock, because he has a Twitch 3-hour long video on how the DK64 generates seeds. And I didn't, okay, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't watch the whole video. It is 3 hours long, and I just fucking ADHD went off hard. But the beginning part of it, like the first like hour of it, is so helpful. And then there's Balam, who just is in the BK Rando server giving guidance, not actually working on anything in particular, but able to give feedback here and there, and has just been an awesome person to work with. So let's compare the randomizers for a second. So this is obviously not all the N64 randomizers, but these are the ones I want to talk about because they are somewhat similar to BK in that they are adventure platformers, but they are different, and we're going to talk about why. So as N64, you start off with all the moves. I think they're actually changing it so that you don't start off with all the moves, which is I think kind of cool. But you start with all the moves, and the only collectible you care about are the stars. Get enough stars, get to the end. You might care about like the wing cap, invisibility, or phase through thingy, and then the metal cap. But for the most part, you don't learn things that like block you, right? So furthest randomizer from BK out of this list of um, randomizers. So moving on from that, Ocarina of Time is a you get a item, it unlocks several different branches, and for the most part, Ocarina of Time isn't a movement based randomizer. You have long shot, you have the swift boots, kind of whatever, to hover over the thing, but overall, it's not like a um, oh, I unlocked uh, backflipping, right? That's just the thing that you start off with. For DK64, we're still getting closer and closer to what Banjo-Kazooie would be, where this is a collectathon with a bunch of different items. You need this to you need a collection of these to open up this. You need a collection of these. There's different Kongs that you can unlock, each with different moves. Um, the main differences between Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64 are the temporary states and items. So, for example, in Donkey Kong, if you become Diddy Kong, you are just Diddy Kong. There's no point where you de-transform, like in Banjo, where you become the termite, you walk out of Mumbo's mountain, and like 10 steps out, and Mumbo's like, yo, watch out, magic's getting weak. So there's that, but there's also the bananas. You collect bananas in Donkey Kong 64, and the game remembers that. Does not remember it for Banjo-Kazooie. For all the notes that you collect, once you exit the level or die or whatever, it gets reset. So closer, but not exact. And I do want to mention the Banjo-Tooie randomizer. There's been a trend where it's getting closer and closer to Banjo-Kazooie, but Banjo-Tooie is actually, I want to say, just as far away from Kazooie that Donkey Kong 64 is from Kazooie. Because with Tooie, you do learn moves, and there are like temporary transformations and stuff. But the notes again save, right? And there are some transformations that you can take out of the areas, for specific, things. So I want to say Tui's a slight bit closer, but still kind of far away. And I'll address what we can do to make it closer to DK64 or Banjo-Tooie. But the issues that we already talked about are the temporary items and transformations. And one of the solutions that we have for the temporary items is we can actually disable the levels resetting upon death. Um, the other kind of thing we have for that is there is an option of exit to witch's lair. If we adjust that to become exit to level start, we can make it so that it acts as if it's a death warp, right? And players always have access to that. They should not get soft locked in any area, and even if they do get soft locked, they go back to the level start, but they don't actually lose their progress on items. And then the other one being transformations and detransformations. So specific areas that transformations can go into that BK can't, areas that BK can go to that the transformations can't. Those can all be handled by what we're calling regions. Shout out to the DK64 team. I'm not sure if they came up with it or whether they stole it from someone else, but as Elrock said, every randomizer just takes little snippets from the other randomizers. So we're taking regions from them. Shout out to the DK64 team. So before we can get into what regions are, we need to go into what the lower levels are. So what are items? So I didn't know a good word to describe it, but I know that the DK64 randomizer uses collectibles, events, and then I think like Kongs or whatever, right? I'm shoving all of those into something called items. So collectibles like jiggies, empty honeycombs, notes, right? Flags such as abilities or events, like the boggy race or whatever, right? And then inventory is going to be a item class that we don't care about. So like blue eggs, red feathers, and gold feathers. So in version 1 of the rando, we did not care where we place any items. We just said all the worlds are open and all the no doors are removed, right? And so now you can just go throughout the entire game basically and not get limited. Version 2, we're like, okay, let's actually have it so that the worlds can be closed, the no doors can be closed. And then I just went under the assumption that you would have enough notes, crossing my fingers. Like there hasn't been a time where people didn't have enough notes unless they like had some jank settings with like 0 notes, but like there's still 5 notes in the Mumbo's Mountain Hut, and so they couldn't progress the game. And like they quickly found out that was a soft lock seed. Moving on though. For version 3, I want to just say I think everyone will have enough eggs, feathers, and gold feathers. I don't think there's gonna be an instance where it's like, oh, you got 10 from bottles, all of a sudden you ran out of like this, so you can't do it anymore. There's gotta be at least like 1 gold feather somewhere. And typically in the levels that you learn the move, there will be an item, or maybe I can guarantee that there's a blue egg, red feather, or gold feather in each level, just to make sure that you always have access to at least 1, and then you can keep going in and out of the levels in order to regain that inventory space. But I'm not tracking that, so moving on from there. So what are the attributes of an item? Well, one is actually the only one that we actually really care about, besides like the item type, because like again, there's the collectibles, events, and or flagged ones, and the inventory are the conditions. So what transformations can interact with that item, like obtain that item? So you might be like, oh, I can only think of a Mad Monster Mansion Empty Honeycomb. Well, every Bottles Molehill can only be talked to by BK. You can't be a transformation for those. Maybe I can make it so that transformations can talk to it, but then it's not intuitive for the player because normally you could not learn a move as a transformation. So, I'll get into intuitiveness words. I will get into that later. But for now, understand that we're gonna make some items specific to some transformations. The other item requirements are other item requirements. So, for example, in order to do the boggy races, right? To do the walrus one, you need to save boggy first and collect that jiggy. In order to do the BK race with boggy, you need to do the walrus one, and which means you need to do the boggy, save boggy. So just as an example. So now that we got over items, what are locations? Locations are XYZ positions on the map that can hold an item. So for example, if you think about Mumbo's mountain, inside the Mumbo skull, in the eyeball, there's a Jiggy, right? The Jiggy would be the item, and the location would be that eyeball location. So these guys also have conditions that we need to meet, right? But we need to make sure that these overlap. So, for example, if we have an item, like an ability, right, that only a transformation can reach, like let's say that there's Stilt Stride in Mr. Vile's area, right? Only the crocodile can get in there, and so we don't want to put that move in there because crocodile can't learn it, becomes a useless item. So the location requirements need to overlap the item requirements, and if they don't, then we can't put that item there. Now, here's regions. This is a slight bit confusing, but I'll try to break it down in order to make sense. So, a region is a section of a map that are one of the following three. So, can the player warp to this region? So, let's say, for example, we are in Mumbo's Mountain. The map itself is the main area, right? Like main Mumbo's Mountain area. But we're going to consider two regions. The first region is the main part of the map, like a majority of it. And the other one is atop Ticker's Tower. Because in order to get there, you need to warp there. There's no spring jump or flight, or whatever, in order to get you up that high, in order to reach it. So we need to consider that its own region. However, let's assume that we actually start at the top of Ticker's Tower, and this we'll get to number 2, right? If we start at the top of Ticker's Tower and we jump off the ledge, right? Cool, we reach the next region, but we can't really get back. That's a bit difficult. So an example I have for this one, other than the Ticker's Tower one, is Rusty Bucket Bay. The start of the level, if you were to run straight forward into the water, how can you get back up? There is a ladder you can climb, but you might not have the move climb. And then there's that box on the side, but then you have to go over the roof slope. And unless you know how to do slope abuse, you would actually need some moves to get back to the starting area. So regions that are hard to transfer over to, or hard to transfer over back to. And then the last one is if there's a detransformation in the area. And so for this one, I like to think of the Mumbo's Mountain lobby area. As the ticker, or as a termite, you can go within the area near the level, but as soon as you try going down the hallway, Mumbo's like, wait, no, magic's gonna run out, and then you detransform. So anything after that detransformation is its own region. Despite it being easy to get to as Banjo, you can't get there as the termite, for example. So those are the 3 criteria I'm considering for a region. If you can come up with something else, let me know. I don't want to be like for Mumbo's Mountain, there's the above water and then the below water, because at that point, all you really need to do to get underwater is dive. And you're not gonna like spawn in that underwater section, so I'm not even considering that. Now, there might be some weird caveats, like if you're in TTC and whether you've done leaky or not, but I'm not gonna consider those for now, because even without moves, you can obtain the notes, and we can have the sandcastle flag require leaky. Or maybe even just like eggs or something. So, what do we need to, like, what attributes do we need for regions? So, it needs a list of locations. So, anything that can hold an item in it, we need to note down all those, like, locations. We need to know the exit region instances. So, for example, for the Mumbo's Mountain lobby area, we have the warp towards Spiral Mountain, the warp towards Mumbo's Mound, the warp towards the next level of the lair, and we also need to know the transition because the termite can't pass by there. So if we're only considering the entrance area of Mumbo's Mountain, there would be two exit regions. One of them is a physical warp, and the other one is a detransformation. So those are the exit regions. We need to know about transformation paths. We need to know if we ever get access to a transformation like a termite. And from that point on, where can that termite go? Detransformation areas, I've already covered enough of, so I'm going to go ahead and skip that. But allowed transformation. So it'd be cool if you could do Mr. Vile as Banjo and Kazooie, but you can't. You need to be the crocodile. So we need to have a criteria on what transformations are allowed here, and I will get to that more when I get into warps. Let's talk about warps for a second, though. So a warp is an interactable object. It's usually a sphere that will transfer the player from one map to another. And I say map specifically, not region. So, as an example, to go from the Mumbo's Mountain entrance to the Spiral Mountain entrance, still in the lair, you need to pass over the detransformation sphere, right? That's not a warp. A warp is specifically going into the level and going to a different map, not a different region. So going back to regions, actually, if I go back up, that's why these regions have an exit region, not a list of warps. Now, for those exit regions, whatever, we can have it attached to a warp, but that's something that we'll get into whenever we actually start coding. This is not a coding stream or video, whatever. What are the attributes of a warp? Where will this warp take the player? By the way, we are not moving the warp physically. We are just reassigning the map and entry point of the warp. And then what transformations are allowed to use this warp? There are some transformations that, or some warps that allow Banjo to actually be in there. So, for example, imagine the Gruntilda's Lair Mad Monster Mansion Crypt, where you can only get in there as the pumpkin, but you can be Banjo in that room because you can detransform in that room and then hit the switch in order to raise the water level. As opposed to Mr. Vile, where Banjo is never allowed in that room anyway. So there is a reason why what is allowed in the region does not match what is allowed for the warp. Now, let's talk about levels. So this is a collection of map or regions. I'm going to go ahead and say regions, by the way, because that's just fitting. I don't have like a class for maps, but a collection of regions that all share total. So in our case, it is Jiggies, Empty Honeycombs, Jinjos, Notes, Blubber's Gold or whatever, Acorns, stuff like that. So if you exit the area and you lose that progress on like Notes or whatever, that's what I'm considering as a shares totals. So the attributes that I have so far are where you start in the region, and this actually might change in the future. I might make it so that the start region can be anywhere in the world. But for now, let's just get the basic logic ready and have it start at the same default place. And then within the level, there is a list of regions. We need to know what kind of areas we have access to. Here's what it all looks together. So this big square, I'm gonna call it like it's indigo. It's kind of like purplish, bluish, so I don't know what to call it. I'm not a colors person. I played Hue once and didn't do well. So here is the level. And if we look at the green hexagons, these are all the regions. And within these regions, we have the locations, and within the locations, there is an item. These orange lines represent the warps in which direction they go. I happen to make all these bi-directional, but there are some warps that are single directional. So we can't necessarily just assume that it's all bi-directional. And I'll get to that later, but let's, for example, imagine that this is Mad Monster Mansion, and this is the main area. You can go to Mumbo's hut and come back. You can go to the restroom, which leads you to Lago, which you can go back into the restroom, which you can go back to the main area. And that's kind of how you see it. And these are the items that are placed along those areas. So what are considered conditions? So what determines, one, whether we can beat the seed, and two, can we reach an area or collect an item or, whatever. So each of these needs to be in a dictionary of, I think, transformations with lambda functions. So for example, if you are Banjo and you have access to like flip-flap, you can get to a high ground or something like that, right? But then we also need to consider, if you are the pumpkin, can the pumpkin go through this warp or reach high enough to reach this warp? But we also don't want to overlap it. Just because the pumpkin can get there does not mean that Banjo can get there. So for every region, we need to say this transformation has access to this area. That way, we have it so that I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Well, okay, so as an example, Mad Monster Mansion, you go to Mumbo's Skull, right? In Mad Monster Mansion, and you become the pumpkin. From there, you want to get into the empty honeycomb room. But in order to get into that room, Banjo and Kazooie needed to break the window first. So, conditions are there for the pumpkin that still require Banjo-Kazooie to have access to that area. I hope that makes sense. For logic, what are things we need to consider? We've already talked about some of these, but whether the item and the location requirements overlap. If you have a empty honeycomb that only the pumpkin can pick up, but you have it in a place where the pumpkin can't reach it, then you can never collect that item. Therefore, bad item placement. We need to make sure that they overlap. The warp in the region, we need to make sure that if the pumpkin needs to get into the Mad Monster Mansion, go into their crypt, whatever, that the warp works for the pumpkin. Or, no, I mean, BK can also go in there, but let's go ahead and say Mr. Vile, I guess that's a better one. We don't want BK going in there. So you want to make sure that it is the crocodile going in there. How do you determine whether the item is placed down? And that's a matter of the requirements overlapping, but also progression for the game. Let's say we are playing vanilla game, right? Except we haven't placed down Talon Trot yet. We need to place down Talon Trot in order to get to the 50-note door. But how do we figure that out? How do we know when to place a specific item? And so that's something to consider. And then, are we aiming every seed to just be for the win condition or for 100%? There are people who don't want to do 100% because if you want to do 100%, you might as well just play the regular speedrun, because even any percent, you have to collect 94 jiggies and like 810 notes, and like that's quite a lot. There's like not that much time save. If you're playing it glitchless, if you're playing with B Adventure, I think it's like half the time or whatever, but we're gonna go for a casual perspective. But there are people who like the chaos. They like to 100% things. They like to feel achievement whenever they like trophy hunters, for example, for the 100%. So do we make it aim for the win condition or 100%? And if we aim for win condition and not 100%, how do we convey that to the player that it's not 100%? Or do we make it so that the player has to say, I want this many jiggies, notes, empty honeycombs in order for that to be the win condition? Just some food for thought. Here are the 3 goals I have for completing the logic for BK Rando. First one is actually trotless. And I know that sounds like a meme, but it's very doable. I've actually already had code that as soon as you collect all that stuff, it instantly transports you to the beach. But in order to shuffle things around for both Spiral Mountain and Mumbles Mountain, and I specifically want to do both of those because you do start off in Spiral Mountain, and Mumbles Mountain has enough regions to consider. And the main regions I want to consider are the top of Ticker's Tower and the rest of the main area. It also has a transformation, so that's good to note. And then it also has, the Jiggies, Notes, whatever, Jinjos. And I'm not sure if you'll ever get to a point where you soft lock. But it has a good chunk of things in order to test out. And so I think Trotless is the best way to go to start off with. Defeating Gruntilda is main story, collect enough Jiggies, enough notes, get to the end, have the right moves, beat Gruntilda. Once we finish that one, the base one, what everyone's expecting, then we go to other win conditions of what people are not expecting. Like a condition for only collect all the Jinjo Jiggies, or only collect the one note that happens to be somewhere in the entire universe of BK. Just make it silly, make it fun, have some kind of goals that players can attain to. If we can implement bingo within the ROM, I already mentioned this for Trotless, but I have it so that you can determine what specific conditions. But if people want to generate a random seed, they don't want to know the conditions beforehand, right? And there's no way for me currently to show off a bingo board in the game of BK that also automates I have collected this, I've done this, whatever, right? With text and shit. So anyway, that's all I really had. That's a general overview. I will start working on the classes if no one else is going to, which by no one else is going to, I'm not trying to push it on someone else. If someone's really ecstatic on working for on the logic, go for it. I'm there for guidance, right? But if no one else wants to work on it, which is it's been the case for 3 years now, I will step up. I will finish it off, and the basis will be there, and maybe someone else will come in the future and change the scope of it. But we'll see how this goes. And this isn't just a call, or reach for help for programmers. If you want to be a tester, shoutouts to Forever Flummoxed. He's been super helpful, and he has a bunch of notes. Also, shoutouts to Hat Wearing Gamer. He's also helped a bit. But we now need to think about the new stuff we're implementing. So one of them being the regions, and the other one being the don't reset the worlds on warps / exit to level start. I think those will affect logic. Anyway, talk to you guys later.